I never imagined that property lines could cost me my peace of mind. But then again, I never expected to find a gazebo in my backyard one random Tuesday morning. The structure appeared overnight a white wooden monstrosity with latticework, and a shingled roof that definitely wasn't there when I went to bed. My coffee nearly slipped from my hand as I stood at my kitchen window, blinking in disbelief at what was clearly the work of Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association, the bane of my suburban existence. My name is Noah Caldwell, and I've lived in Oakridge Estates in Charlotte, North Carolina for just over 3 years. The development is beautiful mature oak trees, well-maintained streets, and houses with enough character to avoid that cookie-cutter look. When I purchased my corner lot property, I was drawn to the extra space and privacy afforded by the wooded area that backed up to my yard. The real estate agent had made it clear that those woods were part of my property, extending a good 30 feet beyond where my lawn ended. The property survey confirmed it. What the agent glossed over was the ruthless efficiency of Diane Patterson, the HOA president whose mission in life seemed to be making mine miserable. "What the hell?" I muttered, setting down my coffee mug and slipping on my shoes to investigate. The morning air was crisp as I walked across my lawn toward the unwelcome addition. The gazebo was substantial, at least 12 feet in diameter, with benches built into the interior. Someone had gone to great expense and effort to construct this thing, and they'd done it on my property without so much as a courtesy call. I pulled out my phone and dialed the HOA management company's number that I'd unfortunately had to save after previous run-ins regarding my mailbox color and the height of my grass during a 2-week business trip. "Oakridge Estates Management, how can I help you?" a cheerful voice answered. "This is Noah Caldwell at 1428 Maple Drive. There's a gazebo that's been built on my property overnight. I'd like to know who authorized this and why I wasn't consulted." "Oh, that must be the new community gathering space. Let me check the notes. Yes, the board approved it last month. It's part of the neighborhood beautification project. It's on my property," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level. "My private property, not community property." "That can't be right, Mr. Caldwell. The gazebo is located in the community green space. The survey I have says otherwise." "I'm going to need someone from the board to contact me immediately about this." "I'll pass along your concerns," the woman said, her voice cooling. "In the meantime, please don't interfere with the new installation. It's for everyone's enjoyment." I ended the call and walked around the gazebo, examining it from all angles. There was a small brass plaque attached to one of the posts, dedicated to the community of Oakridge Estates by the Homeowners Association, 2025. They'd actually mounted a dedication plaque. The audacity was breathtaking. I went back inside to retrieve the property survey from my filing cabinet, then spent the next hour taking measurements and photos, confirming what I already knew. The gazebo was entirely within my property boundaries. By late morning, I'd emailed the HOA board with the survey, photos, and a firmly worded request to remove the structure immediately. The response came that afternoon, not via email, but in the form of Diane Patterson herself, marching up my driveway with the determination of a general leading troops into battle. Diane was in her mid-50s with an immaculately maintained blonde bob and the permanent expression of someone who just smelled something unpleasant. Today, she wore beige capri pants and a pastel blouse with the collar turned up, completing the look of someone who'd like to speak to my manager. I opened the door before she could knock. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, lips pursed, "I understand you have concerns about our community improvement project. It's not a concern, Deanne. It's trespassing and unauthorized construction on private property. She waved a dismissive hand. There seems to be some confusion about property lines. The association has always maintained that area as common space. There's no confusion, I replied, holding up the property survey. This is the legal document showing my property boundaries. The gazebo is well within those boundaries. Deanne's eyes narrowed. The board has documentation indicating that portion of land was designated as community space in the original development plans. Then your documentation is outdated or incorrect. I have the current legal survey that I paid for when I purchased this house. Mr. Caldwell, we've invested significant HOA funds in this project. It's meant to enhance our community and property values. Surely you can appreciate that. I'd appreciate being consulted before someone builds a structure on land I pay taxes on. Deanne's forced smile remained, but her eyes had turned to ice. Let's be reasonable. The gazebo is already built. It's a beautiful addition that benefits everyone. Why don't you join us for the official opening this weekend? You might find you enjoy having such a lovely feature so close to your home. I stared at her in disbelief. I want it gone, Deanne. You have until the end of the week to remove it, or I'll take appropriate action. I strongly advise against any action on your part, she said, her voice taking on a warning tone. The association will protect its investments. I suggest you review your HOA agreement regarding community improvements. And I suggest you review property law in North Carolina. She gave me one last withering look before turning on her heel. We'll be in touch, Mr. Caldwell. As I watched her march back down my driveway, I realized this wasn't going to be a simple matter to resolve. The HOA had overstepped literally and figuratively, but they weren't going to back down easily. That evening, I called my friend Frank Evans, who worked as a real estate attorney in Charlotte. They did what now? Frank asked after I explained the situation. Built an entire gazebo overnight on the wooded part of my property. I've got the survey showing it's clearly on my land. Have you formally notified them in writing? Sent an email with the survey attached and photos of the gazebo's location. Good start, but you need to send a certified letter too. Paper trail is important. Do you have title insurance? Yeah, from when I bought the place. Contact them as well. This is exactly the kind of issue they cover someone making a claim against your property. You think the HOA has a leg to stand on, Frank sighed. Legally. Not if your survey is correct and up to date, but HOAs can be persistent. They might argue they've been maintaining that area or that there was some easement granted in the past. Do you have the original plat for the development? No, just my survey. I'll see what I can dig up at the county records office. In the meantime, document everything. If they're planning some kind of dedication ceremony, that might actually work in your favor, additional evidence they're claiming your property. What about just taking it down myself? Technically, it's an unauthorized structure on your property, so you'd be within your rights. But I'd document everything thoroughly first and maybe give them one more formal notice. Cover your bases. I thanked Frank and spent the rest of the evening drafting a certified letter to the HOA board, explicitly stating that the gazebo was on my property and must be removed within 7 days. The next morning, I dropped the letter off at the post office before heading to work. My job as a software developer for a financial technology company kept me busy. But throughout the day, I couldn't stop thinking about the gazebo situation. I'd moved to Oak Ridge Estates specifically because the lot offered privacy and space, and now the HOA was trying to turn part of my backyard into a community gathering spot. When I returned home that evening, there was a notice taped to my front door. The HOA was holding an emergency board meeting the following night to discuss community improvements and member concerns. I was cordially invited to attend. I called Frank to update him. "Interesting," he said. "They're trying to make it seem like a neighborhood dispute rather than a property rights issue. I've been looking into the original development plans for Oak Ridge. There's nothing indicating that area was ever designated as common space. So they're just making that up. Looks like it. But here's the thing, the current board might genuinely believe it's community property if someone gave them bad information. Have you talked to any of your neighbors? How long has that area been wooded?" I realized I didn't know. My immediate neighbor to the left was an older couple who'd been there since the development was built 20 years ago. "I'll talk to the Millers tomorrow," I said. "They might know something about the history." The next morning, I knocked on Harold and Ruth Miller's door before leaving for work. Harold answered, already dressed for his daily walk. He was in his 70s with a full head of white hair and the sturdy build of someone who'd been active all his life. "Noah, what brings you by so early? Sorry to bother you, Harold. I have a question about the property lines." "How long has that wooded area behind my house been?" "Well, just woods," Harold frowned. "Since they built the place. That was all part of the original lots. Why do you ask?" I explained about the gazebo. Harold's frown deepened. "That's definitely your property. When we first moved in, the developer made a big deal about those corner lots having the wooded areas included. Extra privacy, they said. Worth the premium they charged. Has the HOA ever tried to claim it was common space before?" Harold shook his head. "Not until Deanne Patterson took over 2 years ago. She's been talking about unutilized spaces and how the association could maximize community resources. Bunch of nonsense if you ask me. She just likes controlling things. Would you be willing to put that in writing? That you've always known that to be private property?" "Absolutely. Ruth and I will both sign something. We're going to that meeting tonight too. This isn't right, what they're doing." I thanked Harold and headed to work, feeling slightly better knowing I had at least some neighborhood support. That evening, the community clubhouse was packed for the emergency meeting. I arrived early and took a seat near the front, my property survey and other documents organized in a folder on my lap. The board members filed in at precisely 7:00 p.m. and took their seats at the table facing the residents. Deanne sat in the center, flanked by 4 other board members. I recognized Thomas Green, a retired accountant who served as treasurer, and Brenda Williams, the secretary. The other 2 were newer residents I'd only seen in passing. Diane called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We've called this meeting to address concerns about our newest community improvement project, the Oak Ridge Gathering Gazebo." There were a few appreciative murmurs from the crowd. Clearly, some residents were pleased with the new addition. "It has come to our attention," Deanne continued, "that there is some question about the location of the gazebo. Mr. Caldwell believes it may be on his property." All eyes turned to me. I maintained a neutral expression. "The board has reviewed the development plans and historical maintenance records, and we're confident the gazebo is located on community property that has been maintained by the association for years. However, in the interest of transparency, we wanted to open this matter for discussion." I raised my hand, and Deanne reluctantly acknowledged me. "I have the current property survey right here," I said, standing up and holding the document. "It clearly shows the property lines extending 30 feet into the wooded area. The gazebo is approximately 20 feet into my property." Deanne's smile remained fixed. "The association has maintained that area for over a decade, Mr. Caldwell. Our landscapers have cleared brush and removed fallen trees. That establishes an effective easement. Occasional maintenance doesn't create an easement, I replied. And I've been maintaining that area myself since I moved in. I have receipts for tree service and brush clearing. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Harold Miller stood up. I've lived here since the development was built, and that wooded area has always been part of the corner lots. The developer specifically included that in the original sale as a premium feature. Diane's smile faltered slightly. While we appreciate long-time residents' perspectives, the board must rely on official documentation and established practices. Another resident raised her hand. How much did this gazebo cost, anyway? And why wasn't there a vote on spending that kind of money? Thomas Green cleared his throat. The project was approved under the board's discretionary improvement fund. Total cost was approximately $15,000. This caused an uproar among the residents. $15,000 was no small sum for a neighborhood of our size. Diane banged her gavel. The expenditure was within the board's authority as outlined in the bylaws. I spoke up again. Regardless of the approval process for the funds, the fact remains that the structure was built on private property without the owner's consent. That's trespassing and unauthorized construction. Mr. Caldwell, Diane said, her voice taking on an edge, the association is prepared to assert its rights to that property based on historical use and maintenance. If you pursue this matter, it could result in costly legal proceedings for all parties. It was a threat, plain and simple. Fight us, and we'll drain your bank account in legal fees. I'm prepared to defend my property rights, I replied calmly, and I believe the law is firmly on my side. The meeting devolved from there, with residents taking sides and the board becoming increasingly defensive. After nearly 2 hours, Diane abruptly adjourned the meeting, announcing that the board would consider all perspectives and determine the appropriate path forward. As the crowd dispersed, several neighbors approached me to express support. Others gave me cold looks, clearly viewing me as troublemaker for opposing the board's improvement project. Frank was waiting outside when I left the clubhouse. "How'd it go?" he asked. "About as well as you'd expect. They're claiming some kind of easement through maintenance, but they're on shaky ground and they know it." "I did some digging today," Frank said as we walked toward our cars. Diane Patterson has been cited twice by previous HOAs for building unapproved structures on her own property. Seems like she has a habit of ignoring boundaries. Seriously. So this is a pattern for her, looks that way. And there's something else. The contractor who built the gazebo is her brother-in-law's company. I stopped walking. "Are you kidding me? That's a clear conflict of interest." "Yep. And I bet if we looked at other improvements during her tenure, we'd find similar connections." So this isn't just about a gazebo. It's about Diane funneling HOA money to family. Potentially. Hard to prove intent, but it doesn't look good, I thought for a moment. What's my next step here? They're not going to remove it voluntarily. You've given formal notice. The ball's in their court now. If they don't remove it by your deadline, you have options. You could file for an injunction, or you could legally remove it yourself. It's an unauthorized structure on your property. The thought had crossed my mind, but hearing Frank say it out loud made it seem more real and more satisfying. Would that create more legal problems? Not if you document everything properly and give them reasonable notice, which you've done. But they'll be furious, so be prepared for that. I nodded, my mind already turning over the logistics of dismantling a gazebo. The next few days passed without any formal response from the HOA. I noticed increased foot traffic near the gazebo, as if Diane was encouraging residents to use it to strengthen their claim. On Friday afternoon, the day before my deadline expired, I received an email from the HOA board. After careful consideration, the board has determined that the Oak Ridge Gathering Gazebo is appropriately placed on community property. We invite all residents to enjoy this new amenity. The official dedication ceremony will take place Sunday at 2 p.m. They were doubling down, completely ignoring my property rights and my deadline. Fine. If they wanted to play hardball, I could too. I called Frank to update him, then made a few more calls to line up what I needed for the next day. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. I'd arranged for my cousin Marcus and his friend Tyler to help me, both of whom worked in construction. They arrived at 7 a.m. with a pickup truck full of tools. "You sure about this, Noah?" Marcus asked as we surveyed the gazebo. "These HOA people can be vindictive." "I'm sure. I've given them every opportunity to do the right thing. I have all the documentation proving it's on my property, and I gave them formal notice." We set up a video camera on a tripod to record the entire process, just in case questions arose later. Then we got to work methodically dismantling the structure. We worked carefully, preserving as much of the material as possible. By noon, the gazebo was reduced to neatly stacked piles of lumber, roofing, and hardware. We were loading the last of it onto Tyler's trailer when a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of my house. Diane Patterson emerged, her face contorted with rage. "What have you done?" she shrieked, storming across my lawn. "Stop this immediately." I walked calmly to meet her, positioning myself between her and my property line. "The gazebo was on my property, Diane. I gave you formal notice to remove it by yesterday. You chose to ignore that notice. This is vandalism, destruction of community property. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I replied. "I have the property survey, proof of notification, and we've recorded the entire removal process. The gazebo was built illegally on my land." Deanne pulled out her phone and jabbed at it furiously. While she was reporting her version of events to the police, several neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Harold and Ruth Miller walked over, standing beside me in silent support. A few other neighbors joined them, while some stood closer to Deanne, looking disapprovingly at the dismantled gazebo. 2 police cruisers arrived within minutes. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, approached us. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking between Deanne and me. Diane jumped in before I could speak. "This man has destroyed community property, a brand new gazebo that the Homeowners Association just installed. I want him arrested for vandalism." The officer turned to me. "Sir." I explained the situation calmly, showing him the property survey and the certified mail receipt proving I'd given formal notice. The gazebo was built on my property without permission. I gave the HOA a week to remove it, which they refused to do. Since it's an unauthorized structure on my private property, I removed it. The officer reviewed my documents while his partner spoke with Deanne, who was becoming increasingly agitated. "It appears to be a civil matter," the officer finally said. "If the structure was indeed on private property, the homeowner has the right to remove it after providing notice." "This is outrageous," Deanne exclaimed. "That gazebo cost $15,000 of association funds, which you spent without authorization to build something on private property," Harold Miller interjected. "The board never put it to a vote by the membership." The officer raised his hands. "Like I said, this is a civil matter. If the association believes they have a claim, they can pursue it through civil court, but there's no criminal issue here that I can see." Deanne turned to me, her face flushed with anger. "This isn't over, Caldwell. The association will bill you for the full cost of the gazebo, plus damages. You'll be hearing from our attorney." "I look forward to it," I replied. I'm sure they'll be interested in how you awarded the construction contract to your brother-in-law's company without a competitive bidding process." Diane's face went pale. The crowd of neighbors murmured in surprise. The officers, sensing the tension, suggested everyone disperse. Diane stalked back to her SUV, already on her phone again, presumably calling the HOA's lawyer. Marcus and Tyler finished loading the materials, and I thanked them for their help. The dismantled gazebo would be stored in Marcus's workshop until the matter was fully resolved. As I expected, the formal demand arrived by courier 3 days later. The HOA was demanding I pay $15,780 for the gazebo, plus an additional $5,000 for community distress and loss of planned amenities. They threatened legal action if I didn't pay within 30 days. I forwarded the letter to Frank, who called me within the hour. "They're bluffing," he said. "They know they don't have a case. This is just Deanne trying to save face." "What should I do?" Counterclaim. "We'll send a letter demanding they reimburse you for the cost of removal, trespassing, and emotional distress. Let's also request all records related to the approval of the gazebo project, including bidding documents and board minutes." You think they'll back down? Once they realize you're not intimidated and start looking into the paper trail Diane probably didn't maintain properly. Yes, I think they will. Frank drafted a response that was both professional and devastating, pointing out the numerous legal issues with the HOA's actions and requesting extensive documentation about the decision-making process. We sent it certified mail the next day. The following week, I received notice of another emergency HOA meeting. This time, the topic was board election procedures and financial oversight. Interesting. When I arrived at the clubhouse that evening, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Deanne and 2 of her loyal board members were absent. Thomas Green, the treasurer, called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming. As some of you may have heard, President Patterson has taken a leave of absence from the board due to personal matters. As vice president, I'll be serving as interim president until our next scheduled election." The room buzzed with speculation. Thomas raised a hand for quiet. "The board has been reviewing some irregularities in our project approval processes and vendor selections. We're committed to full transparency moving forward." He went on to explain that the board had voted to rescind the demand for payment related to the gazebo incident and would be conducting a full audit of all capital expenditures over the past 2 years. After the meeting, Thomas approached me privately. "Mr. Caldwell, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize for the gazebo situation. It appears there were lapses in our due diligence." "I appreciate that," I replied. "What exactly happened with Deanne?" Thomas lowered his voice. "When we started asking questions about the bidding process and reviewing the paperwork, things didn't add up. The quoted price was well above market rate, and there were no competing bids as required by our bylaws. When confronted, Deanne claimed it was an oversight, but then we found other instances of her steering contracts to family members," he nodded grimly. "Among other irregularities, she resigned when we mentioned involving a forensic accountant." 2 weeks later, I received a settlement offer from the HOA's attorney. They would drop all claims related to the gazebo and pay me $2,500 for the cost of removal and inconvenience, in exchange for my agreement not to pursue further legal action against the association. Frank reviewed the document and advised me to accept. "It's a reasonable resolution, and it allows the new board leadership to move forward without the specter of litigation." I signed the agreement, and a week later, a check arrived in the mail. I used part of the money to plant new trees in the area where the gazebo had stood, restoring the privacy buffer that had attracted me to the property in the first place. The story might have ended there, but neighborhood drama has a way of resurfacing. About a month after the settlement, I was working in my front yard when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A woman in a business suit emerged, carrying a portfolio. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Felicity Evans from the district attorney's office. I was hoping to speak with you about Deanne Patterson and the Oak Ridge Estates, HOA. I invited her inside, curious about this unexpected development. We've been investigating a pattern of financial irregularities involving several homeowners associations in the county," Felicity explained once we were seated in my living room. "Miss Patterson's name has come up in connection with multiple allegations of steering contracts to family members and associates. You're saying this wasn't isolated to our neighborhood?" "No. She served on 3 different HOA boards in the past 5 years, and we've found similar patterns in each one. The gazebo incident at your property is particularly interesting because of the clear documentation you maintained." I told her everything I knew, sharing copies of all my records and connecting her with Frank for additional context. "Would you be willing to provide a formal statement?" she asked. "We're building a case for possible fraud charges." I agreed without hesitation. While I hadn't set out to bring down Deanne Patterson, I couldn't say I was sorry to see justice being pursued. The woman had abused her position of trust and misused funds that hardworking homeowners had paid into the association. Over the next few months, I provided additional information to Felicity's office as needed. In the meantime, Oak Ridge Estates underwent significant changes. Thomas Green and the reconstituted board implemented new transparency measures, including posting all financial transactions on a community portal and requiring multiple bids for any project over $5,000. 6 months after the gazebo incident, Deanne Patterson was indicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The charges involved 3 different homeowners associations and totaled nearly $100,000 in misappropriated funds. According to the indictment, she had systematically directed contracts to family members at inflated prices, receiving kickbacks for her efforts. The news made the local paper, and suddenly, my stand against the gazebo took on greater significance in the eyes of my neighbors. What had seemed like a property dispute was now recognized as part of a larger pattern of corruption. The former board members who had supported Diane's decisions faced no criminal charges, but were required to resign from all HOA positions as part of a settlement with homeowners. A completely new board was elected with Harold Miller serving as president, committed to transparency and proper governance. As for me, I finally had my peaceful backyard again. The new trees were growing nicely, and the wooded area remained undisturbed. I'd even been approached about joining the HOA board myself, an offer I politely declined. My brief foray into HOA politics had been quite enough for me. One evening, almost a year after the gazebo first appeared, I was enjoying a quiet dinner on my back patio when Harold and Ruth Miller stopped by with a bottle of wine. "Thought we should celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the Great Gazebo Standoff," Harold said with a grin, pouring 3 glasses. I laughed. "Is that what people are calling it now?" Ruth nodded. "That and the Patterson takedown. Did you hear she took a plea deal?" "No, I hadn't heard." 5 years probation, restitution of all misappropriated funds and community service, Harold said. "And she's banned from serving on any HOA or nonprofit board for life." "Seems fair," I said, raising my glass. "To justice and property rights. And to standing your ground," Ruth added. "If you hadn't fought that gazebo, Who knows how long her scheme would have continued? As we sat there enjoying the wine and the sunset filtering through my trees, I reflected on how something as seemingly simple as property boundaries had exposed a web of corruption and brought a community together. The gazebo that was meant to be Diane's crowning achievement and personal profit center had instead become her downfall. The certified letter I sent before demolishing the structure was still in my files, along with all the documentation of the ordeal. Sometimes I thought about how different things might have been if I just acquiesced to the HOA's demands. My backyard would be a community gathering space. Diane would still be funneling HOA funds to her family, and who knows what other improvements would have followed. Instead, I'd taken a stand over 30 feet of wooded land that most people would never even notice, and in doing so, helped restore integrity to our neighborhood governance. "You know," Harold said, interrupting my thoughts, "the new board is considering an actual community gazebo." "On the actual community property by the pool," I laughed. "As long as it's on the right side of the property line, I'm all for it." "Oh, we're getting 3 separate surveys to confirm," Ruth assured me with a wink, "and competitive bids from non-relative contractors. Your legacy lives on." My legacy? I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd simply been protecting what was rightfully mine, but in the process, I'd helped change the culture of our entire community. The new HOA board was functional, transparent, and actually responsive to homeowners' needs and concerns. Meetings were well attended, with active participation rather than the rubber stamp approval that had characterized Diane's reign. In the weeks that followed, I did agree to serve on one committee, the newly formed Ethics and Governance Committee, charged with ensuring proper procedures were followed in all HOA decisions. It seemed fitting, given my role in exposing the previous administration's abuses. As part of my new role, I helped draft a property rights charter for the neighborhood, establishing clear protocols for any work near property boundaries, and requiring explicit written permission from homeowners for any projects that might affect their land. The charter was unanimously approved at the next general meeting. Life in Oak Ridge Estates settled into a new normal. The HOA still enforced the standards that kept our neighborhood attractive and maintained property values, but did so with respect for individual homeowners' rights and through proper, transparent procedures. Occasionally, I'd see former board members who had supported Diane around the neighborhood. Most avoided eye contact or offered only the briefest acknowledgement. I didn't harbor any resentment toward them. They'd been manipulated by a skilled operator who knew how to maintain control while skimming profits for her family. Still, it was clear they felt embarrassed by their roles in the scheme. About 18 months after the gazebo incident, the new community gazebo was unveiled at the neighborhood pool area, properly located on community property. Built by a reputable contractor, selected through competitive bidding, and at a cost significantly lower than Diane's version. At Harold's insistence, they invited me to cut the ribbon. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this," I protested when he first suggested it. "I'm the guy who tore down a gazebo, remember?" "You're exactly the right person," Harold insisted. "You're the reason we have a functioning HOA that actually serves the community instead of exploiting it." So, on a warm Saturday afternoon, I found myself standing before a crowd of neighbors, holding an oversized pair of scissors. The new gazebo was beautiful, a cedar structure with clean lines and built-in benches, large enough to provide shade for pool goers, but not so imposing as to dominate the space. "Before I cut this ribbon," I said, feeling slightly awkward as everyone watched, "I want to thank the current board and all the residents who worked to make this happen the right way." This gazebo truly belongs to all of us because it was built with transparency, integrity, and respect for our community's rules and values. As applause rippled through the crowd, I cut the ribbon and officially opened the new gazebo. Children immediately raced in to claim the space, while adults mingled and enjoyed the refreshments set up nearby. Thomas Green approached me, extending his hand. "Never thought we'd see you inaugurating a gazebo, did you?" I laughed, shaking his hand. "Life takes some unexpected turns." "The auditors finished their final report last week," he said, lowering his voice. "They found nearly 30,000 more in questionable transactions during Deanne's tenure. The prosecutor is considering additional charges. That's a lot of money." "It is. But the silver lining is that we've completely overhauled our financial systems. Every dollar is tracked and accounted for now, and the membership seems more engaged than ever." He was right. Looking around, I saw neighbors chatting and laughing together, taking ownership of their community in ways that hadn't happened under the previous regime. What had started as my personal stand against an encroachment on my property had evolved into a neighborhood-wide recommitment to proper governance and community values. As the party wound down and I walked home, I passed the spot where Deanne's illegal gazebo had briefly stood on my property. The young trees I'd planted were flourishing, already providing the privacy buffer I'd valued when purchasing the home. The irony wasn't lost on me. If Deanne had simply approached me properly and requested an easement or land swap for her project, I might have considered it. Instead, her bulldozer approach and corruption had cost her everything. Back at home, I opened my mail to find the latest HOA newsletter. The front page featured a photo of the new gazebo ribbon cutting, with me awkwardly wielding the oversized scissors. The headline read, "Community celebrates new gathering space. Built right, done right." I smiled, pinning it to my refrigerator. Sometimes standing your ground isn't just about protecting what's yours, it's about establishing the principle that rules matter, boundaries should be respected, and no one is above accountability. The gazebo I demolished had become a symbol of overreach and corruption. The one that replaced it stood for transparency and community, not a bad outcome for a property dispute that began with an unexpected structure in my backyard. As I looked out my kitchen window at the now undisturbed wooded area behind my house, I felt a deep satisfaction. My land was my own, the community had healed and justice had prevailed, and I never had to pay a cent for that illegal gazebo.